West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, there has been another mass murder, as you know, at a school in Texas where the uniquely American phenomenon of mass murder at schools, complete with television coverage, like the television coverage you're seeing tonight, began. All of that began in Texas in 1966 when Charles Whitman, a name that became one of the most famous names of the 1960s, went to the top of the Texas Tower, the University of Texas in Austin, and with his rifle aimed down at people walking across the campus and shot and killed 16 of them before he was shot and killed by police. Before going to the tower, like many of the mass murderers who followed in his footsteps, Charles Whitman shot and killed his wife, shot and killed his mother. The mass murderer in Sandy Hook in Connecticut, 46 years later, shot and killed his mother before going to the elementary school there to murder 20 kindergarten and first grade students and 6 adults working at the school. The latest reports indicate that as many as 18 children and 3 adults were shot and killed today at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, a town of 15,000 people, about 60 miles from the Mexican border. Some reports indicate that the children were mostly in grades 2, 3, and 4. The mass murderer of children at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut in 2012 changed Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy's focus in the Senate, where he has become the Senate's leading expert on a uniquely American way of death, being shot to death at school. Senator Murphy rose on the Senate floor today without a prepared speech and said this.
Mr. President, there are 14 kids dead in an elementary school in Texas right now. What are we doing? What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority, if your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing? What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as existential as this. This isn't inevitable. These kids weren't unlucky. This only happens in this country and nowhere else. Nowhere else do little kids go to school thinking that they might be shot that day. Nowhere else do parents have to talk to their kids, as I have had to do, about why they got locked into a bathroom and told to be quiet for 5 minutes just in case a bad man entered that building. Nowhere else does that happen except here in the United States of America, and it is a choice. It is our choice to let it continue.
The former governor of Texas, George W. Bush, while serving as president, refused to support an extension of the assault weapons ban of the 1990s that did help reduce mass murders. Since then, Republicans in the House and Senate have consistently refused to consider any legislation involving guns and ammunition. Both of the Republican senators from Texas today issued thoughts and prayers statements, which can easily be translated into promises to make sure that American mass murderers remain the best equipped mass murderers in the world. Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz are, in effect, promising the people who elected them in Texas tonight that the next time a mass murderer enters a Texas school, that mass murderer will be as well equipped as every other mass murderer who has entered Texas public schools since 1966. Senator Cruz told reporters today that his solution is, quote, going after felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illness, arresting them, prosecuting them when they try to illegally buy firearms. Now, virtually none of the mass murderers in American schools were felons. None of them were fugitives. And those who've had mental illness cannot be arrested for mental illness, as Senator Cruz was suggesting. And almost all of them obtained their firearms legally, many of them as gifts from their parents, or they used their parents' guns. 54 years ago, on the day after Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Senator Robert Kennedy, whose brother, President John Kennedy, had been assassinated 5 years earlier, said, no one, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain who will suffer from some senseless act of bloodshed, yet it goes on and on. Why? Why is the question President Biden asked tonight after he returned to the White House from Asia and addressed the nation from the Roosevelt Room.
I had hoped when I became president I would not have to do this again. Another massacre, Uvalde, Texas, an elementary school. Beautiful, innocent, second, third, fourth graders. And how many scores of little children who witnessed what happened see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake. They'll live with it the rest of their lives. There's a lot we don't know yet. There's a lot we do know. The parents who will never see their child again, never have them jump in bed and cuddle with them. Parents who will never be the same. As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage. I spent my career as a senator and a vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. We can and won't prevent every tragedy, but we know they work and have positive impact. When we passed the assault weapons ban, mass shootings went down. When the law expired, mass shootings tripled. The idea that an 18-year-old kid can walk into a gun store and buy 2 assault weapons is just wrong. What in God's name do you need an assault weapon for except to kill someone? Deer aren't running through the forest with Kevlar vests on, for God's sake. It's just sick. I just got off a trip from Asia, meeting with Asian leaders. And I learned of this while I was on the aircraft. And what struck me on that 17-hour flight, what struck me was these kinds of mass shootings rarely happen anywhere else in the world. Why? They have mental health problems. They have domestic disputes in other countries. They have people who are lost. But these kinds of mass shootings never happen with the kind of frequency they happen in America. Why? Why are we willing to live with this carnage? Why do we keep letting this happen? It's time to turn this pain into action. For every parent, for every citizen in this country, we have to make it clear to every elected official in this country, it's time to act. It's time for those who obstruct or delay or block the common sense gun laws. We need to let you know that we will not forget. We can do so much more. We have to do more.
It is Wednesday, the 25th of May of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, and it is just a velvety, lovely hollandaise sauce egg dish, and I just don't feel like joking around today. Yep, when, anybody getting killed is a heart stopper. I mean figuratively. It just gives one pause, and it gives me pause. And it really shouldn't matter the age of the victims, but there's something particularly disappointing when old people and young people get shot to death in, mass numbers. So, of course, we have another one of those, this time with along the younger spectrum. And what's being done about it? Well, immediately, you got folks like Ted Cruz and the rest hitting the airwaves, accusing us of politicizing the issue for political gain. How dare we be concerned about the blood of children awash in our schools? And what's their solution? Oh, well, we're going to have armed teachers. Hey, they had an armed resource officer there. This shooter had already was running from cops. He had already shot cops, armed cops. No, not any word about, restrictions on having body armor from Cruz et al. Not something simple like that. I mean, wouldn't that give the cops a fighting chance? No, what's their solution? We're going to get tanks. We're going to put tanks at the schoolyard. Let me just jump ahead a little bit here, because something just still didn't set right when I was hearing this story of all these kids getting shot. Then we find out the cops were in pursuit. Apparently he had shot a member of his family. Now, I've heard that member survived, and I need to look into it, so don't take my word for it. But regardless, they were already in pursuit. He had fired and injured cops who were, I get it, they were underarmed compared to him. So they had to call in SWAT, or as they like to say, the tactical team. Now, we've all seen these tactical teams work in urban environments from all of those great war movie or war documentaries and, on the History Channel. All right. And, they just go into a room, and whoever's in there, too bad. So we hear that he's being pursued by cops. They call the tactical team, and then the tactical team chases him to a school. The school. He runs into the school, and now I'm hearing that he barricaded himself in a room with those kids and the teachers. Or a teacher. I think he might have killed the special education teacher on the way in. We don't know the real timeline. I'm just putting it together here. Surmising. So, look, early on, everything's up in the air, so this is just all conjecture. But something still didn't set right with me. SWAT in hot pursuit with a kid I'm going to call him a kid. He turned 18. As soon as he turned 18, he went and bought the guns in Texas. And also, he's from South Dakota. Okay? I don't care what his last name is. It could be, it could be Sven Kutterud. He was still born in North Dakota. There's a lot of Sven Kutteruds in North Dakota, just letting you know. Where are they from, huh? Regardless. As soon as the kid turned 18, he bought guns in Texas legally. Body armor legally. Probably got the body armor before because there's no restrictions apparently on body armor. What is body armor for? It ain't for playing paintball. So, we have the tactical team chasing this guy. He runs into a school, barricades himself in a classroom, and what happens next? Yeah. 19 kids so far, 2 teachers dead. Was it all done by the shooter who ran into the school, being pursued by the tactical team? Or did the tactical team do what it was trained to do? And that's fill a room with lead. I mean, let's be clear. Now, I don't know. You also have to consider that tactical team comes from the area. I heard that the special education teacher was married to a tactical team trainer or member. But I do know that cops usually shoot first and then, avoid the questions later. Okay, where they already have preset answers to the question, and the answer always is, I feared for my life. And so a dozen cops fire all at once because they all, at that moment, feared for their lives. And juries and judges and prosecutors and sometimes even defense attorneys go, you know what? They feared for their lives. How many good guys with guns get shot too by the cops? Because no one can tell who's the good guy. So I predict when we arm more teachers, we're going to get more teachers who are protecting their kids killed. Well, I don't know. The laws are such that the cops won't be held culpable. The dead shooter will be. The dead shooter will be charged with the homicide of all those kids. That's why when there's a car full of kids being shot up by the cops because the driver was driving away illegally, that driver is charged with the murder of the passengers in their car. I think that's part of qualified immunity, isn't it? Or some perverted use of it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we doing? I know I'm preaching to the choir. But America has a really bad gun addiction. Yeah. They want to talk about meth. They want to talk about the Frozen movies. The reason that America is addicted to guns is, once again, I'm going to jump ahead. Western expansion only happened because of the gun. The gun allowed people to shoot up the neighborhood with impunity, and then you got to call in law enforcement to, quell the uprising. Then you build a fort, and then you push guns out there in the frontier, get everybody riled up, shooting each other, intruding on each other's property or well-being, whatever. Then you got to send in the troops, the cavalry. Then you got to build a fort. Then you push the guns more out in the frontier, rile up the area, and then you got to build a fort. Next thing you know, you've got forts from sea to shining white foamed sea. So it's not by accident that the United States of America at this moment is awash in guns, when there's a global fascist movement working to, violently take down representative democracies around the world, and they are. CPAC met in Hungary with a bunch of Hungarian Nazis. We'll get into that here in the curated part. In fact, we better. Oh, my God. Well, I wasn't going to rant even this long, but I have. So let us calm ourselves down, take some deep breaths, and get riled up in the curated part of the show. Okay, well, at the top, of course, that was Lawrence explaining how being murdered in school is a uniquely American way of death. I would say, actually, gun deaths, they're coming back to surpassing COVID deaths. So, in other words, Americans are dying naturally, at least the American way. That is what makes it so exceptional, apparently. Well, on the rest of the menu, Big Pharma Dem Kurt Schrader's potential loss in Oregon's primary has rekindled Democratic interest in pushing through prescription drug legislation. Yeah, we have our own mansion here in Oregon. The GOP has allowed bigotry to be mainstreamed at conservative events, so much so they're meeting with Nazis in Hungary. And Supreme Courts in Iowa and other GOP-controlled states continue to stymie abortion bans. So much they want to put, get this, they want to put term limits on the judges and Supreme Court justices in those states now. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a Russian naval blockade has halted maritime trade in Ukrainian ports, and the Taliban ordered female newscasters to cover up, so their male colleagues joined them in protest. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link, across the page there near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It would really help if you could send us maybe what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare and continue this powerhouse of resistance as we have been resisting the powers that are arrayed against representative democracy around the world for the last 11 years. And thank you to those of you who have sustained us for so long. And thank you to those of you in advance who will help us in the future because, we like to think positively. And anyway, we need the help. Thanks. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. That gets posted up on Daily Kos because I put it in automatically, and then I scramble to get it linked up on Twitter. But eventually the show notes and links will be at Justice Putnam on Twitter, so that's where you can find the real reportage, by the way. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. And, of course, the deep archive of the whole Netroots Radio library can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Washington Post by Mike DeBonis. Oregon Rep. Kurt Schrader has long served as a reliable ally of the pharmaceutical industry inside an increasingly hostile Democratic Party. Oh, is that how it's put? As scores of House colleagues called for legislation that would allow Medicare to negotiate the prices it pays those companies. That's really being hostile, isn't it? Which promised to drive down costs at the pharmacy counter, but decimate the U.S. drug industry's roughly $550 billion in yearly revenue. Schrader was among a small handful of Democrats who pushed back, and he played a key role last year in narrowing his party's efforts. Now, Schrader's political career is hanging by a gossamer thread after a primary opponent, Jamie McLeod Skinner, who happens to be, coincidentally, my city council person when I lived in Berkeley. We're all moving to Oregon, apparently, to counter the white nationalist Nazis trying to take over the Northwest. We're doing our small part. Anyway, she's made the congressman's opposition to the Democrats. Now, this is the WAPO writer here, okay? Democrats' marquee drug pricing bill a central issue in her campaign. And his potential loss has rekindled interest on Capitol Hill in pushing through prescription drug legislation before the midterm elections, when Democrats are at risk of losing their congressional majorities and any chance of the sort of aggressive policy they have promised in their campaign since at least 2006. Now, I wonder what has happened since then. It's our fault. I know, because we can't seem to bring the Nazis to understand the greatness of following, common decency. All right. The talk has been further fueled by Democrats' urgency to pass legislation, any legislation that can address rising consumer prices, as well as recent comments from Manchin, who played the leading role last year in derailing Build Back Better. Well, we got rid of Schrader, and I know that it's not a foregone conclusion, but he's hanging by that gossamer thread. Maybe we might finally get some nice things. Blake of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. It's pretty remarkable how this keeps happening. When Paul Gosar appeared at a white nationalist conference last year, he soon disavowed white racism and escaped punishment from his party. When, months later, the same group appeared to advertise a fundraiser with Gosar, he initially seemed to defend it, but then House Minority Leader McCarthy said Gosar had told him the event was in fact not real. Again, the GOP gave Gosar the benefit of the doubt. When Gosar then appeared at the same conference this year, this time joined by Marjorie Taylor Greene, party leaders denounced their appearances, but both Gosar and Greene indicated there was somehow again some kind of misunderstanding, and Greene even defended her speech as reaching out to young conservatives who feel cast aside and marginalized by society. Is that what you call it? Again, leaders let it slide without sanction. The sum total of it, as Representative Liz Cheney pointed out last week, is that with those within their GOP and conservative movement have seen that aligning with racist theories like the Great Replacement and even races themselves just is not a deal breaker in today's GOP. In fact, I would say it's a prerequisite. Look what happened to Cheney. The Guardian reported this weekend that one of the speakers at the new CPAC conference in Hungary, Zoltz Bayer, has a history of bigoted comments. That's one way of putting it. Bayer, a talk show host in Hungary and key figure in the political party of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, shared a stage with not just leaders of the American conservative movement, but even Donald Trump himself. Bayer has said on his blog that in 2020, amid Black Lives Matter protests in the U.S., is this the future? Kissing the dirty boots of, and he uses a pejorative about black people, and smiling at them, being happy about this because otherwise they'll kill you or beat you up. There is some dispute about whether Bayer used an epithet for black people, which we'll get to later, as Aaron Blake says. Also recently, Bayer reportedly called Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who descended from Hungarian Jews, a rootless Hungarian, echoing a popular anti-Semitic trope used to marginalize Jews, particularly in the Stalin-era Soviet Union. The adjective was employed in a similar manner by, yes, Adolf Hitler. Not by accident either. During his appearance at CPAC Hungary, Bayer, according to The Guardian, unfavorably compared Calvin Klein ads featuring a white woman whom he labeled very hot, and a black woman who he labeled not so hot. He reportedly added that it's clear that this ad was born under the aegis of Black Lives Matter. Well, it's going to be Antifa or Black Lives Matter. It just depends. Before the Guardian's article landed, CPAC issued a statement late last week that referenced the news outlet and complained of a, quote, coordinated smear campaign on conservative leaders on both sides of the Atlantic. It's not a smear campaign when you're a Nazi. After this article landed this weekend, CPAC doubled down in a statement on Monday. It said, quote, we reject the reporting of The Guardian and have been assured by our partners in Hungary that the substance of this attack is false. Matt Schlapp, yeah, that Matt Schlapp of CPAC, the head of the American Conservative Union, which runs CPAC, said, we reject this unfounded reporting. We have many speakers with independent views. Why, of course, all lone wolves goose step to their own drummer. Thomas Beaumont and David Pitt of the Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. With a staunch anti-abortion Republican governor and large GOP legislative majorities, Iowa would seem poised to ban abortion if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. There's just one catch. A 2018 Iowa Supreme Court ruling that established the right to abortion under the state constitution. I don't know if the people of Iowa know that things are not going to change immediately if Roe v. Wade is overturned, said State Rep. Sandy Salmon, a Republican and farm manager from Northeast Iowa, who has made abortion restrictions a cornerstone of her 5 legislative sessions. Supreme Courts in a handful of states, including others controlled by Republicans, have recognized the right to abortion, but in no state is the issue more immediate than Iowa, where Republicans are calling for a state high court with new conservative justices to reverse a decision made just 4 years ago because F stare decisis. The Iowa court's decision, due within weeks, is an example of the complexities that loom in states should the Supreme Court overturn its 1973 decision that legalized abortion nationwide. Specifically, it highlights the inevitable confrontation between new abortion bans being prepared in anticipation of Roe's reversal and state constitutions. There are states where this is to some extent unknown and an issue that state courts will likely have to confront, said Helen Krasnoff, Vice President of Public Policy, Litigation, and Law for Abortion Rights at the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. But this is an issue that's present in Iowa in this very moment. The Iowa Supreme Court decision that's under consideration struck down a 2017 law signed by then-Governor Terry Branstad requiring a woman to wait 72 hours before receiving an abortion. The court ruled 5-2 that an abortion is a fundamental right protected by the state constitution's guarantee of liberty. Autonomy and dominion over one's body go to the very heart of what it means to be free, wrote then Chief Justice Mark Cady, who died in 2019. Implicit in the concept of ordered liberty is the ability to decide whether to continue or terminate a pregnancy. I would consider that a fundamental right indeed. All right, you can read the rest of the article at the show notes and links, so do. And we are now going to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, The Past is Back. Director Audrey Dewan couldn't possibly have timed it better, but her latest film, The Happening, made its American debut a week after a leaked memo suggested that the U.S. Supreme Court is on its way to overturning the decision which legalized abortion in the U.S. nearly 50 years ago. If you were born post-Roe and ever wondered what it would look like if abortion services weren't available, then The Happening offers a terrifying glimpse. Set in early 60s France and based on the memoir the same name, the main character, Anne, finds herself pregnant. As a promising young college student, Anne knows she doesn't want to be a mother, but her choices are limited. Not only is abortion illegal in that era in France, but she could be criminally charged if she is found out to have terminated the pregnancy. Nonetheless, she's willing to take her chances, and most of the movie's screen time is spent following her, navigating the seedy French criminal underworld to find an abortion provider who at least looks survivably competent. At times, the movie is as much a thriller as it is a drama, and even verges on horror when 2 abortion attempts are shown in graphic detail. Worse still is how Anne is treated on her lonely journey. As she tells the father, who is financially and emotionally unsupportive, she will take care of it, which is what she does. Not only is Anne relatable, but the characters manage a vaguely contemporary look with respect to their clothes and hairstyles, probably not by accident, amidst the period sets. If certain parties get their way, this one could end up as a rip from the headlines piece in short order. Not that the U.S. Supreme Court cares what the majority of Americans want. One struggles to imagine just who wants a return to the world portrayed in The Happening. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. Oil and water, apples and oranges, fire and ice. None of these things really seem like they have much to do with one another. Or do they?
We found that more fire-favorable weather associated with declines in the Arctic sea ice during summer can increase autumn wildfires over the western United States.
Hailong Wang is an earth scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in Washington State.
So we analyzed a few decades of observations on wildfire incidents, sea ice cover, and weather conditions to identify a relationship between Arctic sea ice declining and the wildfire risks. We call it a teleconnection.
Wang says this idea of a fire and ice teleconnection, it's not new. It's a lot like the so-called butterfly effect, a term coined by meteorologist Edward Lorenz in the 1960s to explain chaos theory. The idea can be summarized like this. If a butterfly flaps its wings in one location, that could displace enough air to cause a tornado or some other large-scale atmospheric storm elsewhere.
Yeah, we certainly didn't invent this concept, but it has been in the atmospheric sciences for a long time. So because of the connections within the Earth system, especially in the atmosphere, one small change in one region could affect other regions through the atmospheric circulation.
Connections between declining sea ice and wildfire weather have been made before. Wang says previous findings have relied heavily on statistical relationships.
For example, they find that Arctic sea ice are declining in many years, and they also found increase in extreme weather like wildfires in the western U.S.
But they couldn't explain the cause and effect. So Wang and colleagues took those known statistical relationships one step further. The team applied them to a state-of-the-art climate model with wildfire prediction capabilities.
In that way, we were able to identify the response of the climate system, including the fire weather over the western U.S. and other responses to the Arctic sea ice.
What they found is a tale of two vortices.
So when the summer sea ice is much reduced, ocean can absorb and store more heat from sunlight. Less sea ice cover over the Arctic will allow more heat also to be released from the ocean to the atmosphere in the following autumn and early winter. Otherwise, the sea ice can insulate the heat from the ocean to the air.
So more heat's released to the atmosphere as the sea ice declines.
The anomalous heat in the Arctic can form rising air from the surface, and that can strengthen the low pressure system, which is one of the spinning vortex. It's counterclockwise.
This forms a low pressure system, and Wang says when it moves south, it pushes the polar jet stream off its normal course and forms a second vortex.
So this shift also facilitates the formation of a high pressure system over the western U.S. This high-pressure system is a clockwise spinning vortex. This drives dry and hot air to descend to the ground from the upper air to the ground. Normally comes with clear skies and no precipitation. So those are all favorable weather conditions for wildfire hazards.
The findings are published in Nature Communications, and Wang says wildfire might not be the only result of declining sea ice.
The Arctic changes could also be connected to extreme cold weather.
Like the infamous 2021 Texas ice and snowstorm that knocked out power to millions and caused billions of dollars in damage. Wang says looking for more teleconnections is where his research will go next.
So moving forward, we like to explore more connections of Arctic changes to extreme weather, climate change over other regions of the entire globe along that direction.
If wildfires and sea ice could be this climatically entwined, surely there are other climate surprises just waiting to be unraveled. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwing.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. As president, George Washington demonstrated the value of a strong executive in the hands of a trustworthy person. He stayed within the bounds of presidential authority outlined by the Constitution and the acts of the First Congress organizing the executive branch. For example, Washington conscientiously sought the advice and consent of the Senate in making appointments to office and in executing treaties with foreign governments, as the Constitution required. At the same time, the Senate's refusal to respond immediately to Washington's consultations helped to establish that body's right to both give and withhold its advice and consent. In filling the many offices created by the new government, Washington avoided making appointments on the basis of social standing, heritage, or friendship. His appointments advanced the idea that the best qualified people should be tapped for office. That's all for today's podcast. The show's theme song is Complacent by Cheryl B. Englehart. You can find Cheryl online at cbemusic.com. 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Unions were created to make living conditions just a little better than they were before they were created. And the union that does not manifest that kind of interest in human beings cannot endure. Those were the words of Philip Murray. Born on this day in labor history, the year was 1886. Philip Murray was born in Blantyre, Scotland, the son of a union coal miner. Philip followed his father into the mines when he was only 10 years old. At the age of 16, he traveled to Pennsylvania with his father in search of work in the Pittsburgh area. They earned enough money mining to send for the rest of their family. As a young man, Murray was fired for assaulting his boss. Murray believed the boss was cheating him when he weighed the coal. His fellow miners went on strike to support him, but he and his family were evicted from their company home. The experience convinced Murray that the only justice for workers was through the power of the union. In 1912, the United Mine Workers Union appointed Murray to their National Executive Board. At the age of 33, he became National Vice President of the United Mine Workers under President John L. Lewis. He was considered to be Lewis's right-hand man until the two split on the question of the role of unions during World War II. In 1936, Murray was trusted with an important new effort, leading the Steelworkers Organizing Committee as its first president. Under Murray's leadership, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee chartered more than 1,000 union locals by the end of the next year. year, just 1 week after the historic Flint sit-down strike that forced General Motors to recognize the UAW members' right to unionize. On March 2nd, 1937, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee signed its landmark agreement with U.S. Steel, turning the company-led union into a member-led union.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the continental United States of America, where it is currently 55 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high bumping 90. Is getting to have our normal weather patterns again, which were actually quite abnormal for quite a while. But anyway, we live in what was known as the Banana Belt of Oregon because it had warmer climes, and now it seems a lot warmer than that. But anyway, bumping 90, we know how to survive in it, and we can do it without a whole lot of energy, too. It's lovely. Okay, well, let's see. That means that we will have a mix of clouds and sun throughout the day. Winds out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Partly cloudy tonight with more clouds overnight. Lows in the mid to upper 50s. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Cloudy skies tomorrow with highs only in the upper 70s. Only. Winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon still have not been updated, probably because of all those home kits, and whenever somebody is infected, they never report it anyway. So it's always going to be higher than what is reported. We continue to stand at 437,052 confirmed cases as of late Friday, with 537 confirmed deceased. And we will see how much that will increase, which it always does, because people are getting sick. And I know because the hospitals are reporting it. Fortunately, people aren't dying in the droves that they were. Grass pollen right outside the window here at the mothership in Rogue River proper is rated very high. But the air quality index is good at 24 parts per million. And that daytime UV index also is very high at level 8, so do take care. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 75%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 61 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Paris is 68 and sunny. Rome is 84 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 73 and mostly cloudy, which is good because when it's mostly cloudy, the drones have a harder time to fly. Kabul is 72 and clear. Remember when we were there for about 20 years or more? Hong Kong is 78 and fair. I bet you Britain remembers how long they were there. Tokyo is 68 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 56 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 68 and sunny. And New York, New York is 65 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Shane Harris of The Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Newly declassified U.S. intel shows that a Russian naval blockade has halted maritime trade at Ukrainian ports in what world leaders call a deliberate attack on the global food supply chain that has raised fears of political instability and shortages unless grain and other essential agricultural products are allowed to flow freely from Ukraine. Russia's Navy now effectively controls all traffic in the northern third of the Black Sea, making it unsafe for commercial shipping. The document, based on recently declassified intelligence, analyzed the density of Russian naval activity along portions of Ukraine's southern coast and the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia occupied and annexed in 2014. The blockade that ensued following Russia's invasion in February halted civil maritime traffic, entrapping Ukrainian agricultural exports and jeopardizing global food supplies, according to a U.S. official who didn't want anyone to know who he or she is. The impact of Russia's actions cannot be understated, as Ukraine's seaborne exports are vital to global food security, the official stated. In recent days, world leaders have warned that Russia's blockade poses one of the most dire threats to global stability since the war began. Ukraine is a global food basket. The country is the world's largest exporter of sunflower oil, the fourth largest exporter of corn, and the fifth largest exporter of wheat. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that 20 million tons of wheat are stuck in Ukraine. Russia has deliberately bombed Ukrainian grain warehouses and is hoarding its own food exports as a form of blackmail, she said, holding back supplies to increase global prices or trading wheat in exchange for political support. This is using hunger and grain to wield power. Secretary of State Antony Blinken echoed the grim assessment in remarks to the UN, calling Russia's blockade, quote, a deliberate effort to destabilize the world's food supply, end quote.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mais automne, quand les feuilles tombent partout, si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Miriam Berger of The Washington Post brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The Taliban has ordered all female newscasters to cover their faces while on air as part of broader rules requiring all women in Afghanistan to cover head to toe. It's dangerous for women to refuse to comply, so some male colleagues have donned face coverings in protest. We are in deep grief today, the deputy director of Afghanistan's Tolo News said on Sunday, the day after the Taliban's edict went into effect. He shared photos of male and female staff members sitting together in an office full of screens, all wearing black masks. It is a simple act, but one that could come at a heavy price under the Taliban. The extremist group has whipped, beaten, and arbitrarily detained journalists since it retook power nationwide in August. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.